Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Amaral Walker in for Frederica Whitfield. We begin this hour with Nikki Haley's latest efforts to clarify her statements about slavery and the cause of the Civil War. For days, the Republican presidential candidate has faced backlash from Republicans and Democrats for not mentioning slavery as a cause for the Civil War when asked by a voter in New Hampshire. Well, today she is admitting that slavery should have been the first thing she said when asked.
Yes, of course. The first thing I should have said was slavery. I completely agree with that. When you grow up in the South, slavery is a given. Like when you think of the Civil War, you know it was about slavery. That's not, that's never been in question. And, you look at the fact, I'm a Southern governor who actually asked and got the Confederate flag to come down in front of the State House. So slavery, if you grow up in South Carolina, you know that that's a huge part of history, but you take it for the lesson that it is, which is, yes, that's a stain on our history, but where do we go with it from here? And that is, what is the role of government?
Right.
And what rights do individuals have, and what freedoms do they have? And we want to always fight for freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom for a person to do anything they want to do without government or another person getting in their way. That was if you went on and heard the rest of the explanation, that's what I was trying to say. But yes, I should have said slavery right away.
Well, we are also following the growing legal battles over former President Trump's right to appear on the 2024 ballot. Any moment now, the Oregon Supreme Court could decide whether or not Trump will remain on that state's 2024 ballot. A liberal advocacy group filed a 14th Amendment lawsuit earlier this month arguing Trump is ineligible to run for office because of his role in the January 6th insurrection. Late last night, Trump's attorneys filed a brief with the court urging the Oregon justices to keep him on the ballot. And this week, Maine joined Colorado in banning Trump from its primary ballot. But both rulings are on hold right now. They're caught up in court battles, and sources say Trump is expected to appeal all of them. On Tuesday, CNN's Paula Reed has the very latest.
The Supreme Court facing increasing pressure to weigh in on whether states can remove former President Trump from the 2024 ballot, after Maine became the second state to kick him off based on the 14th Amendment's ban on insurrectionists holding public office.
No Secretary of State has ever deprived a presidential candidate of ballot access based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, but no presidential candidate has ever engaged in insurrection and been disqualified under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
In Maine, ballot eligibility questions first go to the Secretary of State, not the courts. Trump has called for Democrat Shenna Bellows to recuse herself in this case because of previous comments about January 6th, where she tweeted, "The Jan 6 insurrection was an unlawful attempt to overthrow the results of a free and fair election." She did not remove herself from the matter, and now the issue heads to the courts as Trump and the state's Republican Party vow to appeal.
Our voting rights enshrined in the Constitution are sacred to us, and to have one particular person remove really the top candidate from the ballot because she dislikes that person just smells of politics.
The question of Trump's ballot eligibility has been debated in multiple states, with only Maine and Colorado taking him off the primary ballot. Even California on Thursday opted to include him. In a statement, the Trump campaign accused Colorado and Maine of election interference, attempted theft of an election, and the disenfranchisement of the American voter. Even some of Trump's rivals have criticized states taking him out of the running instead of leaving it to voters.
It makes him a martyr. He's very good at playing poor me, poor me.
Can you have a Republican Secretary of State disqualify Biden from the ballot because he's let in 8 million people illegally?
The Colorado GOP has already appealed that state's ruling to the United States Supreme Court, asking the justices to take up 3 key questions. Does Section 3 of the 14th Amendment apply to a president? And is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to be enforced by states? and also asking whether the GOP has a First Amendment right to choose its candidates. Trump is also expected to appeal.
They're trying to take the election away from the voters.
And in states like Michigan and Minnesota, where they opted to keep Trump on the ballot for the primary, those judges left the door open to relitigate this issue for the general election. So if the Supreme Court does not step in here, this is a question that could hang over the 2024 election through November. Paula Reed, CNN, Washington.
All right, Paula Reed, thank you very much. Joining me now to talk about the political implications of all of this is Shermichael Singleton. He is a Republican strategist, and Basil Smikle is a Democratic strategist and a former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party. Thank you both for joining me this afternoon. Shermichael, let's get to you first because you're a Republican strategist. Okay. How do you think these efforts to keep Trump off the ballot might impact Trump and the 2024 race?
Well, I certainly think it actually strengthens him within the Republican primary. For a lot of Republican voters, even those who may have been somewhat tepid about Mr. Trump, they look at these efforts and they see these efforts as an attempt by individuals who may not like Mr. Trump for political reasons, despite what the allegations are. They may also dislike. They believe that the voters should honestly have the last say in terms of Mr. Trump's potential guilt or his ability or inability to actually be reelected. And so I think Democrats have to be very careful with this. For the history of this country, we have always allowed people to have one single vote for the candidate of their choice. And I think that needs to continue.
Basil, do you agree? Do you think that this issue should be left to the voters to decide rather than courts and officials, elected officials?
Yeah, this does make me a bit nervous. I remember 2000 when Democrats were upset that the Supreme Court essentially came in and decided that election in favor of George W. Bush over Al Gore. And I think Shermichael's right. I think this does really embolden him among some of the GOP primary voters, and it does really fall into all of Trump's language. He talks about, the retribution and retaliation. He also talks about the weaponization of law enforcement and the courts against him. He will say to his supporters, I'm doing this, I'm going through this for you. He has to be the aggrieved party here. So it does fit into that larger martyrdom narrative that he weaves. So I do think that this helps him considerably. I do think Democrats are concerned about the potential outcome of this. We, like others, want to win this on the ground, in the field, at the ballot box. And if he wins as a result of that versus, trying to get him off the ballot, it says a lot about where the country is. Well, but I do think there's value in winning it on the ground.
Sure, absolutely, and we've heard that argument many times on both sides. But we know that these legal battles they've only made Trump stronger for his primary, for his base, right? It plays to him, plays to their base, and they've become perhaps more supportive of Trump as a result because they see this, as politically motivated. But how do you think this impacts, Shermichael, the general election, where Trump is going to need some moderate Republicans and independents to win?
Yeah, Amara, that's a really great question, because if you look at some of the states, Colorado, Maine, which Colorado's Secretary of State actually stated that Trump will remain on the ballot. I also believe that more than likely he'll likely remain on the ballot in Maine, as there are some deadlines that may have indeed already passed. So the question sort of becomes, if this is to remove him because of his behavior, some Republicans may argue this is a political witch hunt, to use Trump's famous phrase, against the former president. Does this actually impact his electoral count? Well, the reality is no, Amara. Colorado, Maine, and a few of those other states were states that Trump wasn't going to win anyway. The difficulty and question for Trump becomes, how is this perceived by voters in states that he needs? Ohio, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. That's a question, I think, of considerable concern for the former president, particularly looking at swing voters. Are there other things that he could potentially pivot to, such as immigration, such as the economy, which is indeed improving over time. Look at some of the foreign issues with Ukraine and Russia, with Israel and Gaza. So those are perhaps some other things that are more directly impactful to people that they're paying far more attention to, that he needs to pivot to, and less talk about this, less talk about 2020, but more so about the present and what he plans to do in the future.
Basil, I'll give you the last comments on Trump's legal issues and how we may see that impact the general election.
Well, yeah, I think that, as was said before, he likes to play the martyr, and I do think it emboldens his base. But it doesn't. But it's not going to make him that stronger general election candidate, because there are independent voters that are going to be very important to this race. Those suburban voters, particularly on issues related to reproductive rights, as sure Michael said, the economy, questions of immigration, affordable housing, which has been a policy that some governors are talking about putting into suburban communities. All these real flashpoint touchstone issues are going to be really important. But overall, I do think that those voters lean a bit more towards the Democrats in terms of governance, democracy, and the ability to have gotten the economy back on track. So I think it favors Democrats, but it's certainly a point where Donald Trump is going to need to pivot into those issues a lot more.
Let's shift gears quickly to the Republican primary race, and I just wanted to get your take, sure, Michael, on Haley's comments today, admitting that slavery should have been the first thing she mentioned when she was asked about the Civil War. Keep in mind that this is the former South Carolina governor. It was South Carolina was the first state to secede or attempt to secede. I mean, is it too little, too late at this point?
I mean, look, I congratulate her on trying to clean this up, if you will, Amber, as best as possible. But this shouldn't have even been necessary, to be quite frank. And she continues to talk about states' rights and limited government. And I keep wondering, who exactly is the former governor speaking to, Amber? Slavery was wrong, but we need to make sure that the government is out of people's business. Those two things, in my opinion, it does indeed seem like a dog whistle. I mean, I think about the vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, and I'll just read a quote from him really quickly, Amber. He went on to say that slavery, the subordination to the superior race, is the natural and normal condition for black people. This is someone who believed that no matter how much education an African American could receive, we would always be lesser than white people. So when you talk about states' rights, removing government out of people's lives, but yes, slavery was wrong, those two things, in my personal opinion, cannot go hand in hand. Slavery was wrong, and we do need government to protect against individuals who want to discriminate against marginalized people, such as the three of us who are people of color.
Fascinating point. Thank you so much. We'll end it on that strong note. Sure, Michael Singleton and Basil Smykel, great to see you both. Happy New Year. Thank you so much for coming on.
Happy New Year.
Shelling attack on the city of Belgorod inside Russia. That is according to Russian officials. The attack appears to be in retaliation to a massive Russian air attack on Ukraine that killed at least 40 people on Friday. It was Russia's biggest air assault since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine began almost 2 years ago. The Biden administration says U.S.-supplied defense systems helped knock many of the Russian drones and missiles out of the sky as it called on Congress to pass more spending for Ukraine's defense. CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson joining me now. Hi there, Nick. Tell us more about the significance of this attack on Belgorod inside Russia, obviously shattering any sense of security for civilians in Russia. What do we know about this attack?
Yeah, it's hard to really nail down all of the specifics because Russia has a habit of sort of not putting out entirely correct and accurate information, but this does appear to be a situation where Ukraine has scored a heavy hit on Russian civilians. It's just Belgorod's about 20 miles or so from the border. President Putin has already responded to this. He's sent his health minister there. He's sent a team from the emergencies ministry. So the Russians are taking this really seriously. The Russian defense minister has said that this will not go unanswered. So this is very serious. For the Russians. We don't know if this was specifically retaliation for the attack on Ukraine yesterday by Russia. It does appear to be the deadliest incident, cross-border attack by Ukraine on Russians and Russian civilians in a Russian town that we are aware of. Since the war began, this is not a death toll that we're used to hearing about. There are regular attacks, but I think absolutely yes, this will have shattered that sense of being safe for Russians, even though there are drones that fly over Belgorod a lot. It does get attacked from time to time by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians will know very clearly that President Putin's having an election coming up in a couple of months, and he's obviously going to win because there's no challenger, but he tries to portray this sense that the war is going well. So perhaps the Ukrainians are trying to get that message back. It's not. There's a cost. You hit us, we hit you. And this is a sensitive time, therefore, for Putin.
Well, and as you know, the U.S. has unveiled its final aid package to Ukraine. I think it's $250 million for arms and defense systems. Obviously, we know that Congress remains at an impasse. They're not at work right now. But what happens, if Congress can't reach a deal for more money anytime soon?
Yeah, the reason that the Ukrainians were really looking forward to that close to $60 billion that they were hoping would get passed and then got stalled was because it allows them to plan over the long term. Now they just get little bits, and it's hand-to-mouth existence. They go through ammunition at a huge rate. Their air defense system, as we saw yesterday, has big holes in it, and they need more munitions, more equipment to fix that. Perhaps one of their salvations here may be in part from the European Union, but the European Union just before Christmas, was on the verge of passing a $55 billion support package for Ukraine to run out over 4 years. But they balked at it. There's a plan B that might free up $20 billion in European Union money for Ukraine. But no, I mean, it just leaves a lot of uncertainty for Ukraine right now.
Nick, these roads will allow humanitarian movement to areas that the UN says is overcrowded with refugees. Battles are also underway in the north, where the IDF says it destroyed a tunnel system. And hideout belonging to Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's leader in Gaza. I'm joined now by journalist Elliot Gotkind, live from Tel Aviv. Elliot, we know that the communications systems are pretty much out. So are people getting these instructions from the IDF, at least near Khan Yunis?
Amara, it's unclear that they are getting these instructions. As you say, communications are at best patchy. And so for people to receive this information would really require Israel to do what it has done in the past, which is to drop physical flyers from the air so that people can see them, and then they would have that map to hand to know exactly where they're supposed to go, and then they can make their own decision as to whether they want to go or whether they don't go. But what's happening right now is that it's just been posted electronically so far as we are aware, and it's unclear that that message is getting through. So people may decide to move or they may not. Ultimately, when they do decide to move, they tend to gravitate towards Rafah in the southern part of the Gaza Strip near the border with Egypt. But Rafah's already received more than 100,000 Palestinians being displaced from other parts of the Gaza Strip in recent days. There's something like 12,000 people per square kilometre there. We know that there's overcrowding. The World Health Organization has expressed concern about the proliferation of diseases such as diarrhea and respiratory diseases. And on top of that, prices are skyrocketing for ordinary goods such as yeast, salt and flour. So it's a pretty precarious situation that people find themselves in, which is, do they stay? Do they even know that they are supposed to go? And if so, where are they supposed to go? And what people tend to do, as I say, is to move to those areas in the furthest reaches of the Gaza Strip, which are already overcrowded and where disease is already seemingly beginning to spread. And the humanitarian situation is seemingly getting worse every day, Amara.
Yeah, sounds like impossible decisions that these civilians are having to make regularly. Can you tell me more about the tunnel system and the hideout apartment that the IDF says it destroyed?
Yeah, this is near Gaza City in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. The IDF says it discovered a strategic tunnel, a kind of tunnel superhighway almost, which had many branches going off in different directions. It ran to a depth of 20 meters. They said it had electricity, it had ventilation, it had sewage systems, it even had prayer rooms, and that this tunnel was found underneath the basement floor of one of Yahya Sinwar's hideout apartments. Yahya Sinwar being the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip and believed to be one of the masterminds of the October the 7th terrorist attacks that killed at least 1,200 people in Israel and resulted in more than 200 being kidnapped, more than 100 of whom are still being held in the Gaza Strip. So Israel sent robots, the IDF sent a robot down there to examine this tunnel, to collect as much intelligence and information as they possibly could. They then rigged it with explosives and destroyed it. Amara?
Elliot Gakhain in Tel Aviv, thank you very much. Well, the United Nations is raising alarm about overcrowding in Rafah, as you heard Elliot mention there, after more than 100,000 internally displaced people arrived in recent days. Just look at these pictures. Residents there describe sky-high food prices and children going hungry. And now the World Health Organization reports diseases are quickly spreading as a result of the mass displacements. CNN's Nada Bashir has more.
A seemingly endless stream of injuries. The wounded rush to whatever hospitals are still able to treat patients. Day after day, the death toll climbs. There is no respite from Israel's widening offensive.
No hope of shelter wherever they turn. Just incredible reporting there by Nada Bashir. For more on the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, I'm joined by Sean Carroll, President and CEO of American Near East Refugee Aid. Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. You recently wrote an op-ed for The Hill describing just 2 days you spent in Gaza. You were there from December 19th to the 21st, and you wrote this in part: Palestinians across Gaza describe feeling like walking dead, relentlessly pursued by death. Just a powerful sentence there. Can you tell us more about what you saw and what struck you?
Well, I hear this from many people. I've heard it directly, and we see it on social media every day. But this is how our staff feel. Even as they continue to work, they continue to deliver humanitarian aid. This is how they feel. One of them told me he expects to die, and we can't do humanitarian aid. We can't do our work when our workers are under the threat, the constant threat of potentially imminent death.
You talk about the grief of some of your colleagues losing loved ones. Can you tell me about their situations, their plight?
Well, on October 7th, we had 12 staff. We've now added some staff to that. Fortunately, none of the 12 have been killed, but among them, 5 of them have lost some 50 family members. And it's not even certain the exact number, because some of them were family members who stayed behind in Gaza City, and communications is difficult, verification is difficult. But somewhere around 50 family members of our 12 staff, Palestinian staff in Gaza, have been killed.
Can you tell us a little bit?
I don't have time.
Right. And if you can just talk to us more about Rafah and what you're seeing there, because, the latest numbers from the UN is that at least 100,000 internally displaced people have arrived in Rafah. This is the southernmost point of Gaza. We know that 85% of Gaza's population is now internally displaced, most of them either in Rafah or heading towards Rafah. I mean, that is a tiny little spot for so many desperate people, and of course some and many afflicted with diseases converging upon. What does that look like? What does it sound like?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, it's the combination of the density. They really are crammed into a tiny. This is one of 5 governorates in the Gaza Strip, but only about 1/6 of the land, and now over half the population and growing day by day is in this tiny piece of land. And not only that, they're not spread out throughout Rafah. They're kind of squeezed into the southwest corner. Some of the areas within the Rafah governorate have also been ordered to evacuate. So it's really a tiny piece of the land, and the zone that Israel has declared a humanitarian zone is even smaller than that, and it's mostly where international aid organizations are. So the settlements, the informal settlements of internally displaced are crammed into the center of Rafah City, and it is completely untenable because there isn't enough space and there aren't enough facilities. This region didn't have the facilities to take care of this size population, and with bombardment continuing and with aid difficulties in getting aid in, it really is a completely untenable, disastrous, craven, depraved situation where people will die unnecessarily unless there are drastic changes. And we're not just talking about bringing in a little bit more aid. We're talking about people being able to go back from where they're from, the bombing stopping, and an increase in the aid coming in.
Right. People going back to where they're from, though, they will have nothing to go back to. But also, there's just not enough food. You talk about, aid coming in is just, scratching the surface. Because as I understand it, you write that more than 90% of people have less than one meal a day. They're going to bed hungry. So that's a major issue. There are calls of an imminent risk of famine from some groups.
Well, that's right. I mean, the international coalition that looks at famine says that now 4 out of 5 of the hungriest people in the world are in Gaza. These images you're seeing, actually, that's an Anira truck. That truck was sent by my organization into Gaza City, and the desperation there of a population that is still remained. It's uncertain exactly how many of the 750,000 in Gaza and some 400,000 in North Gaza have remained, but it's somewhere in the hundreds of thousands still, and had gone many, many days without any aid, and that's a truck of ours arriving. It's untenable, and there has to be a change. There has to be a ceasefire, and there has to be a major influx of more aid.
Yeah. Sean, I can only imagine for you to leave the comfort, of your home and wherever you are, being in Gaza for just those 2 days. I wonder what kind of images are stuck in your head. And shadowy world of dogfighting. Federal agents in South Carolina recently seized 120 fighting dogs in a single day in a crackdown on dogfighting rings. CNN's Isabel Rosales rode along as officials raided the homes of the suspects, and a word of caution that this report includes images of injured fighting dogs that some viewers may find disturbing.
It's pitch black outside a South Carolina church. At the ready are dozens of armed law enforcement officers. Today, they're seizing fighting dogs. Behind them,
I'm definitely anxious. I'm always anxious to see the dogs.
We ride along with the federal prosecutor overseeing the criminal case.
It's heartbreaking. I get very emotional.
Emotional because of how vicious dogfighting is, made all the more clear in court documents. Dogs who have been fought may have scars, puncture wounds, swollen faces, or mangled ears. In one case, prosecutors say an owner killed his dog by hanging it, and authorities found this contraption made from jumper cables, allegedly used to electrocute dogs, inside the home of a Pentagon employee. This CNN exclusive video, evidence from a closed case, shows 2 dogs getting ready to fight. The illegal sport has spiked federal interest. Last year, officials seized roughly 400 dogs from suspected fighting rings, more than in any other year since at least 2007, according to a CNN review of civil forfeitures. Jane Taylor tells me she was a lifelong narcotics prosecutor until she first saw the injuries on fighting dogs.
I had a case where we had a wiretap, and we were listening to the calls of the individuals involved in drugs, and we started hearing a lot of conversations about dogs and dogfighting.
We arrive at the first of 5 homes.
What sort of things are you on the lookout for when you enter a property?
I'm looking at the conditions of the dogs themselves. I'm looking for any sort of scarring, any fresh wounds. And then I'm also looking for what I'll call dogfighting paraphernalia.
Like these treadmills to make the dogs stronger and faster. And
something called spring poles, where the dogs are used to jump up and they latch on it so as to strengthen their jaws.
Experts say dogs are often tied down with heavy chains and weighted collars to increase their strength. Some dogfighters inject their animals with drugs or vitamins to increase aggression. And before a big fight, some fighting dogs are starved to keep them in their weight class, like a boxer. Tucked away in this wooded area, federal agents find the first of roughly 120 pit bulls that would be seized in what will turn out to be South Carolina's second largest single-day seizure of fighting dogs ever, say investigators. They're photographed and loaded into trailers to get medical care and shelter.
When we go onto a property, they'll wag their tail because they haven't had any interaction, friendly interaction.
Major Frank O'Neill with the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division.
They've been abused either by the owner and a fighting dog. It breaks your heart.
People are making a lot of money off of this. My opinion, even $1 is too much to be making money off of this.
And there are plenty of ways to get paid. According to court documents in South Carolina, participants paid $200,000 to have their animals fight against a top dog. Another fighting dog won over $50,000. The owner of a champion dog can make even more money on semen, stud fees, and puppies.
Many of them are drug traffickers because they have to fund gambling of these dogs, and these dogs are very expensive. They're going to have weapons, and if we haven't already arrested them,
Back in 2007, the maximum sentence a suspect can face is 5 years in federal prison. Meanwhile, for the animals, experts say that some dogs are too aggressive to rehabilitate, but others can be adopted and get a second chance at life. Isabel Rosales, CNN, Atlanta.
Well, that's good to know that some dogs could get a second chance at life. Let's talk more about this situation. Judah Batista is the Chief Sanctuary Officer and co-founder at the Best Friends Animal Society. They are a national animal welfare organization dedicated to working with shelters and rescue groups to ensure that no animals are killed. And the group